Hello and welcome to episode 40 of The Garden Log with me, Ben Dark. I am a gardener and this is an audio diary of something that I provisionally call the Magnificence Project, but which in fact is just my job. In the spring of 2017, I was hired to transform a garden from a nice garden into a magnificent garden. The kind of garden that would cause visitors to faint, to reel back in alarm at the beauty they were confronted with. We are nowhere near there yet. In fact, there seem to be more setbacks than leaps forward most weeks. But there is improvement, and this was a week that certainly saw some. It was a week of extremes, of activity and of indolence, and extremes of consumption of plants, both by me and by the more invertebrate inhabitants of the garden. We are infested with box tree moth caterpillars. I'll talk about that in the week in gardening. And I'll also talk a little bit about some plants I've been working with, a fantastic persicaria. Then we're rounding off with a visit to another garden. All in all, it's a very fine episode. Enough of this introduction. Let's get on with the week in gardening. Welcome to the week in gardening. This week started with a worrying discovery. On Monday morning, I was doing my regular hedge inspection and I found that the box tree caterpillar had arrived in the garden. Now, this is something that I had been anticipating for a long time. We have the moths in the neighbourhood. I've seen them flitting about, and also I've spoken to gardeners within the county, people whose estates bound ours, and they have been very excited about it. They've been telling the tales that used to be told about the Berberis sawfly. I lost my entire hedge in just a day. Well, that's nothing. I made a drink and turned around for just 20 minutes and it was gone. My whole topiary peacock disappeared. And there's been a certain masochist excitement. I think we gardeners quite like to see our darlings destroyed. Maybe it's not gardeners. Maybe it is a facet of human nature. Anyway, everyone's very excited about it, and now we have it, so I can join in those conversations. I won't be able to share anecdotes about how quickly our boxwood was destroyed, because I firmly plan on defeating these little caterpillars. I was first tipped off to their presence by the silken bowers they leave in their wake, which sounds lovely but is in fact not lovely at all, because they fill the silken bowers with caterpillar droppings. Caterpillar droppings in themselves don't bother me at all. I'm well aware of the existence of droppings of all different sizes within the garden, and I regard them as a fact of life. What is galling about these particular droppings is their quantity and the fact that they are the exact same colour as the box leaf itself. I don't like it made quite so abundantly plain what is happening to the plants. I should explain very quickly. I know most people who listen to this are gardeners, but there are some who are just fans of background noise. And for those listeners, box is the structural element to lots of gardens. It's what a lot of topiary and hedges are made out of. It's like the bookends between which all of the fluffy, flowery stuff does its thing. Therefore, losing it causes structural and almost existential problems to lots of gardens. Anyway, I found about 20 caterpillars, ranging in length from tiny little things to great big, almost 2 inches, pretty much fully grown caterpillars, which shows that my inspection probably wasn't quite as good as it could have been over the preceding weeks. They're very hard to find. because box is a tricky plant to search through. It's not like when you get sawfly and you know that all the sawfly are going to hang around the edge of the leaf and you can just look for the notches. With the box tree moth, they like to hide in the middle of all these dense plants, and you have to rootle about in there and really get down on your hands and knees and peer. And then they've got this incredibly annoying habit of disguising themselves as the stems on which they are feeding. If you've ever looked at the stem of a boxwood tree, then you will know that it has a sort of striping on it. It has dark wood and green stripes. It's like a black and green tube of toothpaste squeezed out. Those long lengthways stripes as opposed to zebra leg stripes that go crossways. Anyway, that's what the stem looks like. The caterpillar looks a bit like that with green and black stripes. Which actually makes me think it's a lie, all of that stuff on the internet. Every site that I read about the box tree moth caterpillar says they have no natural predators, they are toxic, therefore blah blah blah. But if they had no predators, why would they disguise themselves as a twig? They would be out and proud and probably bright red and yellow and black and more exciting. So I think there is something that eats them, but it's probably in Germany. Anyway, that's the caterpillar. Pretty little things. The moth itself is even prettier, I think. It looks like a little white moth, a silvery white, a moon shade of moth, has sat on the back of a bigger moth, a mushroom gill brown moth. Essentially, it's a white triangle within a brown one. I've been finding them in our house for a couple of weeks, which is strange because we have no box in the garden and none in the house, certainly. I think maybe I smell of box when I come home from work. I might be the first person to be eaten by the boxwood caterpillar. That would be pretty awful. Anyway, caterpillar and moth, attractive both, incredibly destructive. Again, these things are like the sawfly caterpillars in the fact that they grow so fast. Their growth rate is almost exponential. As the mouth parts get bigger, so does their capacity to eat more and to grow more and to get bigger mouth parts. I bet in their first day they can barely manage a 1/16 of a leaf, and then by day 5 they are eating entire stems. It's like one of those fun mathematical facts that if the box tree moth did not pupate, but carried on growing in its caterpillar stage, by day 21 there would be nothing in the universe but one giant caterpillar. Something like that. My 15 or so caterpillars were disposed of. I won't go into the actual methods used, but there are lots of different ways. Choose your own personal preferred brand of dispatch. I then sprayed the box in the garden, and this is the first time since coming to this garden that I've used pesticides. I try not to use those kind of chemicals, but like many weak men, my profession takes precedence over my principles, and I just can't let the hedge be eaten while I'm working here. It's such an important piece of the garden at the moment. It would be fine. It would be like all of those trees that blow down, those essential trees that blow down in every storm and actually end up making gardens better because you can do the unthinkable and get rid of them. But I'm not ready yet to lose the box. So I sprayed the hedge with a general purpose pesticide. And then I ordered some Xanthari. And Xanthari is basically a water-on bacteria, some sort of bacillus something or other, I can't remember what it is, but I think it essentially gives the caterpillar terrible indigestion and leaves it starving, which is awfully unpleasant for the poor caterpillar, but is far better for all surrounding wildlife. That's Xanthari with an X, obviously. And I think the prognosis for our box is fairly good. We will be able to keep on top of it because we didn't have much box in the garden. A lot of our structure is provided by you. And so the amount of box we have, essential though it is, can be inspected daily. We can deploy someone on their hands and knees with their nostrils inside the hedge at all times. Other gardens do not have that luck. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, and I feel very sad for them because I think there are going to be changes afoot. As with all the various ailments and afflictions that the garden is subject to, I will keep you updated. So that was Monday, and on Tuesday I did some turfing. And turfing it's more of a landscaping job than a gardening job. You're working with plants in the carpet sense. You are laying them out off the back of a reel. And as with all landscaping tasks, it's a question of preparation. It's about getting the area on which you are laying the turf absolutely perfect, dead flat, well raked, lovely tilth on the soil, not too compact, not too loose. What you want is a level that will eventually be just about the exact same height as the surrounding landscaping, because that makes mowing very easy. And I found, therefore, you want to aim for the turf, when it's lain, to be slightly higher than the surrounding stone, because it inevitably sinks, no matter how well you tread it down. And we trod this ground pretty well. You tread it down, by the way, by doing that little strange penguin shuffle across it, tiny little footsteps, as if your feet were manacled together and you were trying to escape sideways across a newly ploughed field. My top tip for turf cutting is to use a general cheap, almost disposable carpenter's saw. Those saws that you can buy for about £3 from any DIY store. The classic saw that Bob the Builder might use. And you need to cut that down to about 5 inches long. Otherwise the blade will be too wobbly. So get an angle grinder, cut off the end of that saw blade, and then you have the perfect turf slicing tool. As we all know, the thing that kills turf is drying out, particularly new turf. And the area where it is most prone to drying out is in the corners and on the edges. So you want each piece of turf to be as large as possible. It's worth sitting down and puzzling out the area, seeing the size of your roll, seeing which patterns will leave you with least off-cut pieces shoved into the ground. As keen lasagna chefs will know, the bits that dry out are the corners and the little bits that aren't connected too much. And on the top of a lasagna, that is absolutely delicious and called for. On a lawn, it is unsightly. And so I laid the turf, and it looks beautiful and incredibly unnatural, as all fresh turf does. It looks like an Instagram model. I mean, it's fantastic to see as a specimen, but you know there's something not quite real about it. I'll now keep that watered for the next few weeks and let it settle down and start looking a bit more grass-like. It took a long time, this turf laying, and I worked well into the evening, which was a marker of this week. I decided that as we were approaching a long weekend, I would work late in the evenings. I would stay until 7 o'clock each night and then just take Friday off. Do something less horticultural with my time. This turned out to be something of a mistake. That's something I'll tell you about on Wednesday. And here we are, already on Wednesday. Wednesday was a day of nervous anticipation and frantic activity. I had a big order of plants scheduled to arrive, thousands and thousands of pounds worth, and I wanted to get them all planted and in the ground, happily living their plant lives by the end of the working day on Thursday. An ambitious plan, but one that was not impossible given favourable delivery slots. Unfortunately, my delivery slot was not favourable, and so I spent a lot of the time waiting in that very nervous, anticipatory, purgatory sort of feeling that one gets before an important interview. And finally, at about 5 o'clock, these plants arrived. I have to say they were very good about it. They let me know at all times where the order was and that it was going to be this late, unlike the turf people the day before. Anyway, this order arrived, and I followed the principle that best to get the most expensive things planted first. In this case, it was a new section of yew hedging. This was replacing some beech hedging that was planted bare root in the winter and never really took. It's to blend together two sections of yew hedge, so I thought it best to go back to the taxus. It's not the root ball time of the year, so all the yews we're buying have to be bought in pots. And I was buying yews in 45-litre pots, which are quite big, heavy and cumbersome, and require a fairly deep trench. I bought 12 of those, and struggled digging this trench at the end of a very, very long day. And it got to the stage where I hit a rock at about 5 to 7. The last bit of the trench, and this rock shattered me mentally. I could not get my head around how on earth I would get this lump of flint from the ground into the spoil pile, and I had to go home defeated, laid low by the geology of the Chiltern Hills. And then I came in on Thursday morning, and it took me 20 seconds. Stuck the spade in, wiggled it around, and out popped the flint. Which is the point of this long and rambling lesson. Sometimes it's better to just go home when you're tired. The best gardening, I find, is done early in the morning. It's one of those classic productivity traps that we hear about. The French who work less hours than us and then produce more than us, because we have this strange desire to be present all hours while being completely ineffectual and useless. I didn't learn that lesson for Thursday. I still ended up staying until 7 o'clock, but I made sure that I took regular breaks and that all of the hard work was done early in the morning. So I rushed straight into the planting. And this was a very hard brief. I was planting up an area of brick wall, planting a very thin bed. There are lots of things that you can do with a brick wall, and actually in many circumstances I have lusted after brick walls. But the second part of the brief was that it be more of a ephemeral, diaphanous feel to the planting. And that is very hard when you have a lot of bright terracotta brick shining out behind the plants. The wafting wisps of a fairy field take space. They take layers of planting that gentle breezes can blow through. Part of my plant order included some gaura, Lindhomeri, whirling butterflies, which anyone who knows the plant will know that it is a classic of the diaphanous planting genre. But if you put that in front of a load of brick, then you don't see anything. You see a washed out collection of white blobs. Some of this I solved by planting in front of a large climbing hydrangea. In front of that dark green backdrop, the plant like gaura looks absolutely fantastic. The next approach I took was to think if I couldn't get lightness from the delicate flowers, I might be able to get it from the shape of the leaves. And there's one thing that looks good against a red brick wall, it's green. So I decided to do green in different textures and shades. Mounds of Viola odorata, that very lovely, neat, almost circular-leaved little plant, which I absolutely adore as a ground cover. Then I used a Persicaria Blackfield, which has the most amazing dark crimson flowers, the kind of dark crimson that can take on an entire brick wall and still shine through. They really are fantastic. I used spikes of Crocosmia lucifer because they have that very nice sword-shaped leaf, and also the lucifer flower in that red can stand out against the brick. Lower down I used Hacanacloa macra, and this looked awful at first. I put it in and it looked like an old plant at the end of the season, all beaten up and done with. It actually dragged the whole border down, but all it really needed was a haircut. it needed to have the lower grass-like leaves, the older ones, which had done very well all year and been photosynthesizing, but now had decided to take it easy, to rest, as exhausted as I had been the night before, on the paving stones. Once they were snipped away, leaving just the newer, arching stems that still supported themselves and grew up almost in an arc away from that central point, cascading down like drops in a green waterfall. It added a lot of levity to that mid-section between the crocosmia leaves and the hummocks of the viola. One end of the wall is quite shady, and there I used various types of evergreen fern, mainly the classic, the Splenium scolopendrium, the hart's tongue fern, and Polysticum aculeatum, the hard shield fern, that evergreen version of the shield ferns. And along with those, I dotted in some Sarcococca, another lovely evergreen that will do all right in shade and has a beautiful fragrance. That's the winter box. And then that looked fine, all of those plants going in, but it was rather outline heavy. There were lots of shapes in there and nothing quite blending it together. It was like a picture without any shading. What I needed was a plant to soften and bring everything in together, and for that I used the classic softening plant, everyone's favourite, Stipa tenuissima, ponytails. Mexican feathergrass. It's wafty, it moves in the wind, it's pretty much evergreen, it blends into whatever you put around it. When it's young and small, it looks like someone's just stepped on a little grass landmine, and you get a jagged explosion upwards of grass. And then when it gets taller, it goes fluffier and more oat-coloured, and you let the sun shine through it like gold through a granary, and it's a beautiful thing. Actually, that's one of the only things about using it here with the wall behind it. We won't get the play of light through it, but it still drags together all those other shades of green. The result was a fantastic new border. It looks very, very good, and I have confidence that it can only get better, partly because I've put in some good climbing roses behind. There's some Shropshire Lad in there, and also Pool's Scarlet Climber, which is a fantastic, fantastic scarlet-coloured rose. Not quite as good a colour as the Persicaria Blackfield, but running it fairly close. There were some plants on my order that I thought I would be able to use in this ephemeral planting plan, and in the end have had to be moved elsewhere in the garden. I ordered a load of Penstemon, white bedder, which is a very delicate, dainty white penstemon. And it just didn't go. The plants are young, they get bushier, but these ones are pretty insignificant still. And they looked out of place and almost too cottage garden-y amongst the strong textures of that border. I've planted them out on the edge of some woodland in an area that has some foxgloves and some Japanese anemones, and I think they will look better there. They will look like a plant that is designed for that space between canopy and sky. So don't worry about them. The day raced away. I finished as the night was drawing in. By that time I had switched from drinking tea to drinking beer, giving the whole thing the feel of the end of one of those episodes of a garden makeover show where they bring out the bottle of champagne and all stand around. It's a border that will look at its best next year and then the year after, and then we'll have to go in and give it some serious attention, start thinning out and splitting up all of the stipa that have been planted really a little bit too close together. We'll have to break up the clumps of crocosmia and check how much of the ground the Persicaria has rampaged over. But that's the joy of gardening. That's why we're not just flower arrangers. I'm looking forward to those interventions almost as much as I am to my next plant shopping trip. So that was the week. A short week, but full of graft. Now, why don't we see if I have any horticultural recommendations? My recommendation this week is a trinity, a 3-in-1 special. It is a garden, a building and a blog, all of which belong to Worcester College in Oxford. Those of you who listened to The Week in Gardening will know that I truncated my week slightly. And one of the things I did on this hyper-extended weekend was head up to Oxford and visit the gardens of Worcester College. And these gardens had been hovering on the edge of my consciousness for quite some time, mainly thanks to a fantastic blog written by the gardens team at that college. I think there are about 9 of them in the team, and there is this record of their activities from 2009 all the way up to the present day at a rate of about 2 posts a month. Wonderful factual posts, not necessarily overextended poetic posts, but posts about actually running a working garden. And the thing about Worcester College is that it's big enough and diverse enough in the planting that there is always something interesting going on. So if you want to go there and look at pictures on the blog as I talk about my visit there, then you can go to wocogaga.blogspot.com, which is a very complicated name. Wocogaga, that's W-O-C-O Gaga. Anyway, I'd been following them there for a while, and they have the most magnificent lawn, firstly, in the quad. If you are on Instagram, you might have seen pictures of the magnificent striping that they put into the grass doing the rounds there. They do a circle with a little checkerboard inside, and then a border like a picture frame around the whole lot. It's wonderful. The other reason why the building had been on the edge of my consciousness is they have a new building in the grounds, the Sultan Nasrin Shah Centre. And that particular Sultanic Centre had been shortlisted this year for the 2018 Sterling Prize, which is the prize given by the Royal Institute of British Architects for the best new building in Britain. And I'm not particularly knowledgeable about architecture, but I'm interested. I think lots of people who are interested in looking at gardens are interested in looking at buildings because we like proportion and materials and design in general. And thirdly, because I was reading that book of Head Gardeners by Ambra Edwards, which I talked about a few months ago on the blog, reading about Merton College and its fantastic gardens. And that got me thinking about the other great gardens of Oxford. I did a little research and found that lots of people consider Worcester College to be the finest garden in Oxford, and certainly the lawn to be the finest lawn. The gardens are open most days from 2 until 4 or 5, but there's often conferences or other corporate events. Colleges have to make a living somehow, it seems, so sometimes you can't get in. It's probably worth looking on the website in advance before heading along there. The gardens themselves are spectacular, beautifully well tended to. Beyond the main quad, the first quad as you come in through the door, with the wonderful lawn under its bank of grass. The walls are coated in climbers, floribunda roses, wisteria, campsis radicans, that trumpet vine. And that theme is taken out into the general borders. There are some spectacular tropical plantings along one of the walls heading down towards the lake. I mean, really fantastically large plants. Some of the giant bananas are the biggest I think I've seen in England. These are definitely not bananas that live the winter in situ. I suspect there is a double-height greenhouse somewhere. If you find yourself with a spare afternoon to kill anywhere near Oxford, then I thoroughly recommend going along. But anyway, go and look at the blog. I think this winter, when I have some more time, I'm going to go through their archives from the beginning, from 2009 until the present day, and see the story of a garden, how it's evolved in pictorial form, as an accurate recreation of the life of a professional gardening team in the first decades of the 21st century. We are really fantastically lucky to have these things available to us. The internet is a marvellous place. Oh, I should mention that the building is lovely. you can see that all of the Sultan's money has been well spent. It's very, very modern, but impeccably classical at the same time, which makes sense because there's lots of fantastic Neo-Palladian stuff by Hawksmoor in the other buildings of the colleges. I hope you take something from those recommendations. If you don't, then not to worry, there'll be more next week. And there will also be more from the Week in Gardening. I thank you very much for listening. It does mean a lot to me to see the numbers gently ticking up week on week. I'm off to have a lovely glass of Welsh whiskey, and I will leave you to whatever you're doing with the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.